You and I have talked personally in this session about Gary Lineker before. You told me that you were calling him to check for his tweets. How about a conversation that goes on before output where somebody says, you know what, new show, new start, new term, let's not book Joe, because we know what Joe's going to deliver. BBC News have been criticised this summer right at the end of the session about a report on BBC, on NHS pay, where Debbie Wilkinson, a well-known Jeremy Corbyn supporting union rep, spoken at Labour conference, so not exactly a shrinking violet, was introduced as Debbie from West Yorkshire, who's been a paramedic for 30 years, and then laid into the government on NHS pay. EastEnders, one of my favourite shows. This is a bit of a get out of my pub moment. Where Brexit was likened to COVID. After being shown chucking a glass of water into Sam Mitchell's face, Sharon Watts aggressively told her, "We've had Brexit and COVID, we don't need you here." And then Laura Koonsberg, bringing us right up to date on Sunday. So Laura, who is a fantastic journalist, and I would say fairly unimpeachable on impartiality, actually, in knowing her, watching her, and knowing her personally.
Agreed.
But I would say that her show got off to a challenging start in terms of major appeal outside of SW1 and on this whole issue of impartiality by the Joe Lycett debacle, where he was asked on as a pundit. He did this mock applause after Liz Truss left the interview chair, was then immediately asked for his reaction, and he said she was the dregs of what they've got available and the backwash of the available MPs. Now, whatever your opinion, my colleagues around this table, whatever my opinion of people in my party, not really relevant, but for a brand new show, which really wants to get off to a good start, when you're booking a pundit to go on, Joe Lycett is not an uncontroversial figure. You talk about the conversations that go on after output. How about a conversation that goes on before output, where somebody says, you know what, new show, new start, new term, let's not book Joe, because we know what Joe's going to deliver. You see, somebody who's ungenerous to the BBC could say, you knew exactly what Joe was going to deliver, and that's why you booked him. So those examples, there's some horror stories in them. I could go on. I mean, you've got Gary Lineker, who's still tweeting that the government are voting to pour raw sewage into our waterways. You and I have talked personally in this session about Gary Lineker before. You told me that you were calling him to check for his tweets. I care what he thinks about Spurs' attempt to win the Premier League. It's going very well, I might add. Not what he thinks about water quality. That's not why you pay him. So these individual programme content reviews, in the context of some of those examples that I've just given, what are the yardsticks against which you're judging success? Because many would take those examples I've just given and say, you've got a lot of work to do.
We've always got work to do.
Not just acroose news. I mean, the EastEnders is not news, is it?
I was going to say that because I think there are, if I may, very different. Each of those instances is different in themselves, by the way. Yeah. Very different. No, they're different editorially. I think that's really important
because they're across the output.
And they're interesting, but they have different. I have different views on them. So I think that where in a news output ordering a journalist is giving a view where they've assumed a position, there's a problem. By the way, we do have hundreds of thousands of hours output, I will give you that sentence, and overall I think we are delivering well, by the way. I do think that, and I think we need to be, it's important that we're proportional about this, but there are instances where, and of course you're going to, in my job, get things where you go, well, that sentence wasn't delivered right. Yeah? I think in drama it is a real kind of question on that, because I think characters offering, that's not, Sharon is not the views of the BBC, by the way. We can debate that at length, but I think that, and it's important that you get drama from different perspectives, different writers, all of that. But I don't think it depends on the context of that view and how it's offered. I don't think that. I think that is a different example. With regard to Laura, I mean, Laura is exceptional. I think she handled. We can debate the merits of that particular booking. I don't think it displays BBC bias in the slightest. The audience saw it for what it was, by the way. I mean, I think to date, I just looked at it. I think yesterday, by yesterday, with a front page and a headline, we had 28 complaints. I think we're up to 66 complaints. They saw what it was. It was bemusing. We can debate exactly in the way you've debated about, whether it's the right booking. What I would say is Laura conducted herself as the BBC host, I thought, in exemplary fashion, in a slightly difficult situation. We move on, but it doesn't. I mean, the idea that displays bias. Now, I think there are examples within what you've said where you do say, okay, and this is where it gets, in fact, for me, more interesting. So when we look at the reviews we do, breakfast, country file, English language, morning radio news programmes, the real things I'm interested in, those things I think you've got to sanction or not, or take action, Lineker included, in terms of, and I think we can debate that in a minute. I don't quite think he criticised the government in that way, but I think he has to absolutely be within, and I've talked to Gary. I think he was doing thousands of tweets, and I think overall the behaviour, in terms of where he is, I think he's in a lot better state. He is not at the standard of a news and journalist. He shouldn't be as a news and current affairs executive. But overall, I think that conversation goes on. I'm very supportive of Gary. I think he's a brilliant presenter. And I think it is work in progress in terms of where he draws the line. But we've had a good conversation. I think he understands the guidelines. But I'm not...
When you had that conversation, does he say, okay, yeah, let's do this then, Tim, let's go through this, let's tick this box? Or does he sort of say, yeah, I've screwed up again? I mean, we're paying Gary £1.35 million. I mean, he's down 10 grand on last year, but I'm sure he'll get by when his energy bill comes in. But, I mean, we're paying him 1.35 million quid, and he's a brilliant pundit on football.
He is, yeah.
And he's entertaining.
He is.
I don't care what he thinks about water quality. Why should we be paying him? My constituents are taxed through the licence fee. They don't pay it, they go to prison for somebody to give their opinion on water quality.
Well, with respect, you're not paying him to
but he's doing
tweet. And I think he is. My view is that overall, if you look in the round, I think people are smart enough to see this. Look at this sensibly. I think Gary and I have had a conversation that says, and I think he's seen a massive improvement to where he was a few years ago in terms of his entry into party politics. I think that banning people completely from getting to any issues-based tweeting is probably the wrong position to do, but there's a standard there. We talk about it. I'm very supportive of him. Now, going back to if I may, on the reviews, because that's
the reviews. Yes,
that's what
are the yardsticks?
We're looking at BBC. We're looking at BBC Breakfast, Country File. English. I'll give you where I'm interested. Really, I mean, there's the cases you've made, but actually, I think some of this is deeper, which is what's the question? What topics topic choice? What questions are we asking? What's the level of interrogation, fact-based analysis, verification? So if you take things like breakfast, or you take things, and this is supportive to the programme teams, this is with them, saying, okay, if you take Country File, rural affairs is a live issue for us all, yeah? How are we representing that? Are we properly representing some of those issues? Are we featuring the right topics? They're the things I'm interested in. The programme review will, in a very quantitative and qualitative way, but quantitative way, look at how that is being done. And our teams will assess that, discuss with teams, and the idea is solely to improve the output for the audience. That's it.
And just finally on the news, some of the guests that come on news, I gave that example that's caused a bit of excitement about the opposition activist who was just introduced as Debbie from West Yorkshire. I mean, should researchers be asking guests when they're booking them for... Let's draw back the cover here. So what happens is, for those listening, is that politicians get a phone call from a journalist, and they say, or a text, would you come on The World at 1? You reply and go, yeah, I could do that today. Can we have a chat? We then have a chat. If you say what they think will fit into the programme, then they book you. If you don't say what they think will fit into the programme, they say, I've spoken to my editor and we can't slot you in today. So I sometimes think it would be great to say completely the opposite on the phone call and then the opposite when I'm on air, but I haven't done that yet. Probably never going to work now. But should researchers be asking when they book somebody for what is a very obviously sensitive political story if they have any active political affiliations?
I think they should always be doing the due diligence on appropriate background. That's, I mean, and where we've where we've made mistakes, like putting Alan Dershowitz up to talk about Epstein without giving full background, these are things where my view is that's proper verification. Now, it is contextual, so you don't have to do full background on everything for every, but appropriate contextualisation of what background is relevant is critical. And we've been open about that, and sometimes we don't get it right.
Because I could suggest when you're doing these reviews, you could...
Absolutely right. That's part. With respect, that's one of 30 or 40 questions you'd have, which is guest selection, range of guest selection, what voices you're putting on air. Are you presenting them in the right way? Are you asking the right question? I mean, as I could go on and on, but that's what the reviews will do. But they are meant to, they are constructive. I mean, a programme like Countryfile is a national asset, and I love Countryfile. But it's super. But that's not. We can look to keep improving that.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, thank you for what you said. I would agree the BBC are moving in the right direction. There are clearly, like any newspaper will tell any of my colleagues here, as they get complaints from one party and complaints from the other, and they probably think they're in the right place.
We've got work to do.
And you have exactly the same thing. But for something that is your first priority, we've spent quite a lot of time talking about it in this session, but you're the Director General, you said it's your first priority, therefore it's obviously something that you think is important to how the BBC can go forward as that trusted broadcaster that needs to earn that reputation each and every day. So I just hope that we can continue the conversation and hear more about these individual reviews